Call the meeting to order. Let the record show that this is a city council workshop. And the purpose of this workshop is to understand our facility needs in regards to the police department at 5:30 this afternoon. Some members of council went to the police department to tour the facility and see what the facility was all about. There was a quorum of council present. The press was notified. There were no votes taken at that session, so we are okay as far as our attorney is concerned. And would everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council is going to remain standing for a moment of silence. You are welcome to do so. You can join us if you want. Thank you very much. Item number 1 on the agenda is the workshop facility needs assessment, and I assume that goes to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As the Mayor stated, the purpose of this workshop is to discuss the facility needs, current conditions, and possible solutions of our current police station. With us tonight from Mosley Architect, Dan Mace, longtime resident of the city, and Chris Studi, pronounced it right, also with Mosley Architect. They're going to take you through, and y'all should have at your places exactly what's up on the screen from a PowerPoint perspective, so that way you're not having to crane your neck and look at things. So I'm going to turn it over to these guys, let them kind of take you through their process, things that they have been able to determine, and then let y'all ask questions of them. Once we finish up with that portion, we have Tyler Trout, one of our financial advisors from First Tryon, who will come up to the table and join us for possible funding mechanisms if council elects to move forward. So, Chris, Dan, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Charlie. Members of the council, I hate to tell you, you're getting a presentation from 2 Clemson graduates today, so between us, we may only have 10 or 12 spelling errors in our PowerPoint. We'll do our best we can. Am I on the thing?
Is the green light showing?
Yeah, it's green.
Get somebody from USC to do this for us?
Well, what we're going to cover with you tonight is a summary of a lot of effort and work that has gone into play in the last few months with the chief and his stakeholders and with county representatives to perform this study. What our objectives were as part of this study was to assess the existing police station building for its viability going forward, for its purpose, or for any purpose for that matter. To also assess potential building sites for a replacement facility, should that be the recommendation. To develop a space needs program for the facility with stakeholder groups. And what we did was when we met with those stakeholder groups, we didn't just find out what the current needs were. We have a process by which we look at 5, 10, 15-year needs projections, because any recommendation that we would make with the growth in the city and everything that we've experienced here, we try to get our best, I guess, crystal ball out 10, 15 years. 10's pretty good guess. 15, it starts getting a little cloudier, but we do want to plan for that, because by the time anything's implemented, it's going to be 2 or 3 more years down the road. We also wanted to take that program document and then propose a building layout, and then look at those site options with that preferred layout. Again, this is a kind of a functional driven facility, so really the function of a police station kind of dictates, and we try to find the site that best accommodates that functional program. And then we want to establish, of course, what those probable costs would be for each option under consideration, and establish some site plan options given the site we recommend. So some of the essential concepts that our group determined were of priority to this process was, of course, security being number one. Provide security at the public lobby through some ballistic protection for the staff, and for, on the other side of things, for safe suspect transfer with self-contained short-term holding and processing areas. Right now, you do not have that, and it's a volatile situation that you've got there. Efficiency, allow for better interaction with other agencies that may interact with the city. Training, to train the officers to improve and be better at what they do. Flexibility for involving training methods with multi-use space. Acoustics, right now there's no dedicated interview room space, and so you've got a very difficult situation when you try to interview suspects and that sort of thing. So we want to isolate those types of functions from those interview rooms. Evidence storage. Maintaining the integrity of evidence is critical in today's society of law enforcement. So we want to establish clear and secure chain of custody that doesn't really exist right now. You're kind of doing the best you can. Outreach. Understand that police department is a community asset, and the chief really wanted to stress the potential for outreach to the community, so Tega can be better for it. So we wanted the facility to be welcoming at the same time, and adaptability to provide flexibility for all the changes that we can foresee coming down our way. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to discuss some of the existing facility issues that we identified.
So some of the things that we're going to talk about are things that probably, as those of you who walk through the facility, maybe noted yourself, things, offices being shared, condition of the building, things like that. So we'll kind of go through a couple of the items that sort of, as we assess the building, that kind of stuck out to us. So
Chris,
current,
you might want to pull that a little
Pull that
closer
up.
if you can, just for the people at home.
apologies. Is that good?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a little better.
All right, the current building was not built to be a police station, and so it's kind of been retrofit to serve this function, and as such doesn't meet a lot of the sort of criteria that we just went down. As the city grows, it will need to address kind of some of the changes with the city as more commercial growth comes in, versus being more of a strictly residential community. That obviously is going to change policing in the city. You know, some of the security issues that we talked about with evidence, with when you have arrestees in the building, some of the constraints of the building itself pose a risk to the officers, to the people who are detained, to public in the building. So we would want to find a way to address those issues. So we're going to go through a couple of the pictures here that show, for example, this is an office with an office beyond it. So if you have someone that needs to speak with somebody in that outer office, the person working in the office beyond is not able to kind of get out of their office. So you kind of end up with people being trapped in there. And we have a lot of offices that are shared. And you know, you can imagine when you have two officers that are on a call in some of these offices, it can be hard to concentrate and work efficiently. You also have one set of restrooms for all user groups in the building. That's a major issue that we saw. Your public coming in, your officers and arrestees are all using the same facilities. And that can lead to conflicts, that can lead to vandalism, that's had a detrimental impact on the facility as it's gone forward. Also, the corridors in the building are very small. I'm sure walking through there with a large group of people, you were able to kind of feel that. Those corridors, the narrowness of them also pose a risk as well. You have
Not
more.
to mention they're not compliant with ADA standards.
Not compliant with ADA. There's, yeah, and plus some of the entrances and things in the building are also not compliant. This is the conference room / training room / interview room. It sort of serves multiple purposes, and it is, you know, you really need dedicated rooms for each of those sorts of purposes so that you can make sure you isolate. For example, if you're given an interview room and you need to have a small group conference, you all of a sudden don't have a place to do that. You want to isolate those functions and make sure that you have good dedicated use spaces. From a building condition standpoint, There's a couple things that we saw that gave us a little bit of concern as far as the structure in particular. There's cracking in some of the foundations. You can see in the picture that's up right now, you can see the buttresses that have been put up against the building to keep the structural drift from impacting the building. There's kind of cracks along the sides and along the front. And so those cracks have appear to have been mitigated by those buttresses, but obviously it's, you know, they're holding up a lot of weight in the building currently. We also noticed drift in the columns in the basement level of the station definitely have a visible kind of curve to them, which is something you typically don't want to see columns doing. So also you can see the exterior cladding in this photo, and several areas around the building is in poor condition. So more photos of the kind of the condition of the exterior there. There's been a lot of issues with drainage and waterproofing failing in the building, and so water has gotten into sensitive areas like the evidence room, and there's had to be some mitigation to deal with that. There's a lot of sort of patchwork and working to you know, close up certain areas here for a lot of different uses over the years that have kind of lent itself to the appearance there. You also have physical training that's being done in the area where you have also vehicles coming in and the exhaust associated with that. And there you can see those columns that I was talking about. And storage is always going to be it's always going to be something that's a high need, especially with all of the gear and equipment that goes into policing. There's not enough storage right now in this facility. Access, as we alluded to, is another really important issue. The door on the side is where arrestees and suspects are brought into the station. That door is not accessible. You know, it's rare that you would bring someone in a wheelchair or someone who has mobility issues, but it can happen. And so this poses a liability on several levels for the police force.
There might be a level of inebriation as well.
Yeah, also that, yeah. So as we started to look at the kind of potential sites that the building, that are around the existing facility, we looked primarily at two locations, one being the property itself. There's a lot of land. That's a much larger parcel than we typically see for a police station of kind of a community of this size. We also looked at the maintenance facility that's on the right-hand side of City Hall. So we kind of compared those two sites. You know, the maintenance facility, one of the thoughts behind that was that you have the advantage of being able to not disturb the existing police site in that process. But that site is very constricted. You have an access easement for the Duke Power substation that's behind the property that cannot be interrupted. And so ultimately we determined that there was not enough room on that site to build the station, to have the parking, and, you know, deal with all of the regulatory setbacks and handling stormwater and those kind of issues that we would need to address in that. So even with the kind of the impact on day-to-day operation in keeping the existing station open, we believe that existing site does have enough space that you could build new, keep an existing open, and rework the site to get a much better functioning, more efficient station in there. So the current site, high visibility, it's easy to spot. People know it's there. It's the current location, so you're not having to sort of re-educate the public, oh, we've moved down the street a couple houses. So, you know, there's sufficient space. And one thing that we've also looked at is what are the opportunities that we can take to unite the site with City Hall and allow for sort of a civic campus kind of concept to start to take place. sort of issues and concerns with that site. Grade is going to be an issue. The existing building is also an issue. If we keep the building, kind of what can we do to sort of not further exacerbate the structural issues and that kind of thing. The need to create sort of secure visitor parking and secure staff parking, and it would allow for safe entry of individuals and officers.
I kind of mentioned something about our process, but we'll kind of go back to that now. And what we developed was like a space planning questionnaire for this type of facility. And so we shared that with the chief and his key staff. So we went division by division, looked at what they would need, and again, looking in 5-year increments of what those needs would be. And in this document, we then kind of met with those stakeholders personally and had more of an in-depth interview, so we fully understood what they were saying to us in this questionnaire. And then that allowed us to develop a space program document, which we then put a grossing factor on, like for corridors and wall thicknesses and that sort of thing, to establish some square feet. Well, the first version that we came up with, next slide, is was about a program need of about 17,000 square feet. Currently, your existing facility is about 9,500 square feet. So you can see there's quite a bit of difference. And this is not the current needs, but future needs as well, trying to look 15 years out. Well, working with that initial program, we would then develop several concept plans. I think our first concept plan was something in the neighborhood of the 17,000 square feet. You can see that in this top image here. And you know, meeting with Charlie and the team, we said we've got to get this thing honed in and see where we can cut to get the square footage down. And so as we kind of developed and worked with the group to look at these spaces and seeing what we could shave down from a size standpoint, we ended up coming out with something a little over 14,000 square feet. So quite a bit of cutting there that went on. A lot of it with not an enclosed vehicular sally port, but a screened one, some things like that, vehicle bay, that some of the stuff that could be added later, when and if you needed it, but stuff that the chief felt that he could still safely operate and securely operate, and would allow for some potential future expansion within it, and still function well. So that's what we've developed. I'll kind of take you through that, the plan now. Next slide. From the public areas or the community use areas, the bottom right in that light green is the public entry point. And again, we wanted to have a building that was still had civic dignity, but still had a welcoming type of appearance. So that's kind of what we were thinking about when we started looking at images of what this building could look like. But the lobby with its connected, the top right is a training space that could be used for inter-office training and or public outreach. Next slide. Then the support spaces. This is the light blue is the chief's primarily office with the major and the admin, and then on top of that would be like locker rooms, storage rooms, that sort of support space, physical training, other types of training space. And then kind of at the rear, I guess in this to the left, the top left would be evidence storage. You can see we're showing maybe a high density storage solution. Again, one of the things that we're doing to try to save square footage, because as a chief, in the last 10 years or so, evidence storage requirements by law have really escalated quickly in these type of facilities. So you have to do that to maintain the integrity of the evidence and the case. And so rather than building just large square footage, we're looking at high density type, the rolling file type of things. They make those specifically for evidence now, which is a real big space saver. So you would just purchase those as you needed them and as you grew, rather than just upfitting it right away.
So is the space that's here that it looks like it's going to be chain linked now proposed for chain link? is that for cars that are impounded, or is that for something else?
The vehicle sally port?
Yeah,
That would be where, when you're bringing someone in to be processed, if someone's been arrested, you're bringing them into there, and that's a secure area to kind of enclose the vehicle as the person comes out and goes through.
okay,
But kind of what we propose is doing more of a hardened wall on that street-facing frontage so that there is kind of a more attractive appearance than just the chain link on that side.
gotcha, thank you.
And you can also utilize some tennis screening,
Yeah.
so you're not able just to see who's coming in. But it's just to keep someone from dashing off, because that's when they typically want to do that.
Is there a way of flipping that so that the sally port is behind the station and not in front of the station? Because if the way I'm seeing this right now, where you have Mosley Architect down there at the bottom, that's Tega Drive.
Right, correct.
So now I've got a group of kids who are on their way on their golf cart, on their way to school on a beautiful Tuesday morning, and they see a perp getting pulled out of a car, taken out of a car through the sally port. Is there a way of switching that so it's not visible
Certainly.
to Tega Drive?
Certainly. And you know, I want to kind of share with you this is a study level plan. And so items like that are very doable. It's just a matter of, you know, shifting that segment of space to the rear and to the side. So, and that way they could come in behind it, just like you say, George.
Yeah.
And I think that would be, you know, really good suggestion.
And forgive me on the pulled out comment. That's not, my intention was not to say that. It was to say taken out of a car. So,
Right.
you know, we're not.
Now you
you know,
drew
But it is.
attention to it.
Yeah, I was good until then.
well,
But it is.
you know.
It's something that you don't want to see. and it is.
I just don't want to, you know, have that on the, you know, local media that the sixth graders saw some guy getting pulled out of a car who's, you know.
Right, and that's kind of what you have now, and that was one of the big concerns and deficiencies that we noted at your current facility. So so noted. I think that's a very good suggestion. We then developed a couple of site options. And Chris, you want to go through that?
So this starts to look at that sort of civic campus. How can we combine the kind of the parking areas with City Hall and use sort of where the curb cuts are and everything to our advantage? One thing is that there is quite a lot of curvature to TK Drive in that location, so we didn't want to add more entrances onto the drive, you know, that were other than what was strictly necessary. You already have two curb cuts at that location that sort of you could make do with just one if from a visitor standpoint. You know, so this one is sort of option one, where the visitors are kind of to the right-hand side of the image, and the staff will be coming in to the left side of the image. That allows you completely separating those two groups, and visitors to the police would come from the City Hall side. They would use the stoplight that's there and come onto the site that way, and you can sort of share parking back and forth between the two buildings. And this allows that kind of separation on the staff side as well. Allows the existing building to remain as sort of a vehicle storage. You know, one option as we got rid of that vehicle bay that we looked at is, well, you do have vehicle spaces, garage spaces in the existing building that you could use for vehicle processing, that kind of thing. Option two.
Well, if I could go back to
yeah.
option one too, is one of the things that we would like to see, if possible, is an alternate way into the boat lot or car lot that you have. One of the things we really want to do with this facility is separate the official vehicles from the public vehicles. And right now you have a mishmash and everybody riding through there. That's kind of a no-no. And so if we could somehow find if you know, one of these concepts is what's eventually approved, a way to kind of reroute that entry. You might lose some spaces by doing that, but I think that would be what we would recommend, finding a way to do that.
The other concern I have on that exit, on that coming out of the police, you're gonna have to contend with that median. And that could be a challenge coming out. So I don't know if you shift it further down a little bit so you don't have to deal with the median.
Yeah, in this one, we were working with the existing curb cut, but which is kind of why it has a serpentine drive coming in. And that would allow, if officers do have to come out and respond quickly, they can go ahead and come out and turn left without having to have the median in the way.
Right.
So the other
is what this
concept that we
one's-
look
Yeah,
at.
that was the problem.
Right. So
That's the
this
problem.
one, yeah, would pose a problem from the exiting standpoint, but it does kind of, address the boat lot issue. If there's no other way than to, bring people through this site for the boat lot, you may want to put the visitor parking on the left-hand side of the image, and then you would have a secured staff parking on the right-hand side of the image that could also be, again, shared with City Hall. City Hall can have a little bit more secured parking on their end as well. This would kind of, you would need to sort of screen off some of the existing building if you're going to use that for any kind of police function, just to kind of keep that piece of it separated from the visitors coming in.
And we go ahead with the next one.
All right.
We then kind of wanted to see visually, this is by no means the approved design. Like I said, even the plan is, with a formal design process will, of course, change as we incorporate the development of it. But we did want to kind of give it a go with maybe a potential concept look. And this was concept number one, which would actually face towards City Hall, which is, I think there's some pluses on that orientation. Most people, when they're coming in, you want to have those buildings and those entrances identify themselves, especially if you're new to the city. Option two really kind of faces it, more addresses if you're leaving the city than this version. So just think about that as we look at these concepts. But really, the only place we could find, we tried to rotate it and that sort of thing, but it just didn't work with this particular piece of property. So, all right, now the hard part is paying for it. We always save
Well,
that
before
for
we go to
last.
the paid,
Oh, sure,
paid for
sure.
it, concept two would help us with the Sally Port
Yes.
as well. If you've got your staff parking in between City Hall
Correct.
and the police department, that would help the Sally Port because the Sally Port could be behind the building.
Right.
And then
in concept
visitors-
one, as long as we kept the public from riding through, in concept one, we could still relocate it, as you mentioned, George, about moving that piece behind the building.
Right.
I thought was a good suggestion. I probably recommend that in concept one or two, really.
How many visitor cars are normally? I see 20 spaces for concept one versus 32 for concept two.
Concept two is, it's a little bit the function of the spaces that are already there. So you kind of pick up some extra. I don't think 32 is going to be a need that you're going to have on a regular basis, but you do have this community training room that you could have up to that many visitors in that situation. But in concept one, you're sharing some of the visitor parking with City Hall. So you're building less parking there because you have another visitor lot that's close by.
I was just thinking about traffic that has to go through City Hall parking lot, and it's kind of a narrow, weird little parking lot as it is. So I was trying to think of how much increased traffic we're putting in there. I'm not saying I don't
Right.
think it's a good idea with the concept, but
Well, and that's one of the things that I really liked about the concept two was the fact that we could probably shift a lot of our staff parking even from City Hall and have that shared lot to free up additional spaces in front of City Hall. If there's, large meetings or, just an influx of folks coming in to do business at City Hall. I think both have their pros and cons, certainly. But I think, as council, likes to move forward, one of the things that hopefully we'll be able to take from this is allow y'all to take this home and just kind of think through it. What about moving this space over here, kind of like what the mayor was talking about with the Sally Port? And can you flip the building this way or that way and, kind of give that feedback so that as we do move into a true design phase, so that we'll have an act, that would at least prepare us to go to bid to see what the actual costs, will be, coming from a contractor. Those can be incorporated in once we get to that phase, I think.
All right, now we get to move to the cost part. You know, just as a kind of a general, where are we in the construction market right now? Just this year, just in the last probably 2 quarters of this year, we've seen significant cost increases to building buildings. And there's more on the horizon. We've seen already materials such as drywall, pretty much all building materials are gonna go up at least 10 to 15, 20% just starting January. So I wanted to make sure that my estimate incorporated a worst-case scenario. And again, when I deal with municipalities at this level, this is again a 30,000-foot level, these are numbers that you can work comfortably within. So I'm running about, keeping about a 10% contingency line item on there, which on this cost estimate represents $270,000 or so of contingency. I recommend that the city, at least when you get ready to bid the project, reduce that to like a 5 and carry the 5% contingency budget throughout the duration of the construction process. But in any case, so that's why I want to preface with these numbers by saying there are numbers right now, you know, if you bid in 12 months or so, 12 to 16 months, we feel like you can comfortably come within. But they're not crazy high. So I try to get you to that right size. What we can't do is go and ask our taxpayers for more after they agree to do something. So that's can't do that.
Is there anything to be gained by putting in a 2-level building instead of one wide flat building? Is there anything from a construction perspective, if nothing else?
Probably with this size, it would probably add a little bit of cost. You do reduce the roof area, but you have to buy stairs and elevators and then maintain the elevators. And plus, from an operational standpoint, the chief, again, given this size, can, I think, operate more efficiently on that singular level. There's just not enough to stack over it.
Gotcha.
You know, we looked at that because we had a limited site. So if possible, we'd like to see it on that singular level if we can. So I can run through this cost. The top is what I designate as construction costs, which includes new construction of 14,500 square feet, site development costs, which would be dirt moving and parking lots. The storage warehouse facility, I put about $10,000 in there just to kind of dress that up, primarily for the vehicle bays, because we still feel like you can viably and reasonably continue to use that building, but just take the office functions out of it, turn it into a storage facility, and keep it. And then my 2 contingency numbers are there, which brings the construction number right now to just over $3 million. Then there's also miscellaneous project costs you have to be aware of, and these are, again, budget line item costs. So fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. You know, if you're going to go out and buy all new equipment, I put a 5% multiplier in there. You know, again, we didn't go through in detail, well, this chair is good, this one isn't, you know, and that sort of thing. So that's, again, a budget line item. Site and construction testing services that you have to have, miscellaneous fees, and, of course, no property acquisition costs. So the total bottom line that we feel like you should budget in moving ahead with this project is right around $3.5 million, just under that.
Council, Council, questions for your architect group?
Well, I was just curious, if it was identified that you needed the original square feet, why do we reduce it? If there was a need, is the need no longer there, or was it just purely cost?
I think, yeah, we started off, yeah, as Dan was saying, you know, you had, you know, I had the survey. I took it. Chief took it. Each level within his department took it. So I think what you started out with is some mainly needs, but some wants. You know, hey, it'd be nice to have this or nice to have that. But as you go back and look at it,
Started sharing
added
more
the
conference rooms and
yeah,
like that as
I mean,
well.
realistically, what reduced down was the elimination of the vehicle bay storage, the vehicle sally port, and then really just like the size of the training room and the extra storage space in there, to condense it down to where, yeah, it still functions for us for the next, 10, 15 years. But, yeah, it does help bring some of that upfront cost down to where we can still have a very viable, very functional, much more secure and safe building than what we're in now.
So is this building easy to expand if necessary?
Great question. The place we would have to expand would be to one side, one of the short ends or the long ends in that direction. I think the more likely expansion would be actually you're taking, for instance, your evidence storage and subdividing that into office space potentially, then adding more evidence storage to that side. So it's going to be important to note that when we lay out the parking areas, we want to stay far enough off of that to allow for some moderate expansion. That we've got some built-in expansion in the plan already, and so we feel like we're good for the foreseeable future
Which is
in
what,
terms of office space.
15 years, 10 years?
At least 15.
Now, the
'Cause we
building in the
understand
back,
it's going to be a longer-term building than that.
the building in the back looks like it's pretty bad shape. I mean, I understand use it for a short time for what, storage? But long-term, is that viable, just to knock that thing down? And
At some point, you'll probably, or it might knock itself down. But
It's
we
leaning
certainly want to
already.
we certainly want to turn it into more of a warehouse storage use for the foreseeable future. But you're right, eventually, we'll probably want to replace it. You do have area back there to replace that building in kind
So
with
that'd be
like
like
a
a
pre-engineered structure or
separate
like a butler
annex of
building.
some kind or something?
Yeah, it won't even be visible back there. So you don't have to worry about the aesthetics of it as much.
I think that's where I was leading the question, was, it seems like that's where you go if you need expansion.
Correct.
That building, if it stays 10 years, I can't imagine it's gonna be there 10 years from now. It's, because you're doing maintenance now because you're working in it. If you're not working in it, you're probably not gonna wanna do a lot of maintenance. You're probably not wanna spend a lot of money on keeping it.
I would see us, if we were to move forward with this building to the front of it, I would see us really utilizing the lower level of it, probably more so than what it's being used now. It would be repurposed. Your upstairs, again, could be used for temporary storage, things like that. Definitely not office space, but, you're right. I mean, if you don't have bodies in it that are, using it as office space on a day in, day out basis, you're probably not as apt to dump the money into it that you're putting into it when you are using it as an
But
office
you'd
space.
still have
no
the
doubt.
water intrusion, you'd still
Right.
have the dampness, you'd
Correct.
still have
Yeah,
all
that's,
that
I don't think
stuff.
it's gonna last
So
that much longer.
take that equipment that you want to store downstairs with all that water intrusion and with all of that moisture, that says to me that that's just throwing good money after bad. What's the difference in cost between the 17,000 and the 14,000?
Well, if it's 2,500 square feet difference, just multiply that times $211 a foot, and that'll kind of approximate where it will come in, what the premium would be. So if it's 2,500 times 211,
Come on, Rain Man. Go.
yeah, 527,000, a little bit more than that once I factor in all the, all the extras on top. But moves to 4 million. Correct.
And what's the building setback here?
That's in our zoning code.
I mean, I know what it, I mean, what's the,
25-foot setback,
25
I
feet?
believe.
That's right.
Yes.
And what's the cost of tearing down that building?
It would really just be your tipping fees. We didn't calculate what the demo cost would be. I wouldn't think it'd be terribly expensive. It's just really just doing something with the remainder,
Your landfill
with the
charges.
material.
Well,
You gotta,
what's the
What
ballpark?
number on that?
We want to hold you to it, but not terribly expensive.
Well, we
to
will,
you,
because we're gonna
like-
get Tim
like-
to make
Yeah,
sure the
I'll-
tape's really happening.
Well, if
Well-
a house is about 40,000.
yeah, I was thinking 100,000,
Yeah.
somewhere in that
100,000
realm,
probably.
100,000.
That's a lot of money for us.
I would recommend not doing that immediately. We're having trouble finding demolition contractors because they're all in Texas and Florida. But that's temporary. They'll be back and be back in our market. But you wouldn't want to be doing it right now, but
No, not right now.
be twice that probably right now. I think that'll settle back down.
And then I heard something about, did I hear public restrooms? Is this place gonna be a gathering place for the public, that you need public restrooms, or? I don't
That
really
is-
think about going up to the police station to
Relieve yourself.
relieve, yeah, well, there you go.
Well, I told you about the community training possibility.
Right.
Yeah, and there's that
With
training
that
room, you have
flat
inter-office, agency training, and so that was kind of there for that as well, so.
So is that an additional set of restrooms that wouldn't normally be needed if it wasn't a public access type place?
Yeah, but
That's
even
just a
if you have,
comment.
even if you have other law enforcement or whatever come for a meeting, so it doesn't have to be the public, the general public, it could be others, right, chief, I guess, that we could be there and you
Still a
don't want them
secure entrance like it is now?
trampsing all over the
Yeah,
place.
so typically, if we have, say we're doing Cub Scouts training or something like,
Cadet.
community service training, they have the ability to go to those where there's not guns and other things in the other restrooms. So we try to keep those separate. A lot of people do come up to our lobby to file reports and might be up there for 30 to 45 minutes and oftentimes ask us for our restrooms. And so that's where we end up with a mix
Yeah.
of suspects, citizens, and ourselves using our same restroom right now.
I realize cost is a sensitive issue, but, we've been discussing solar power, and, I'm very interested, your website is very impressive if anyone wants to look at it, and your references specifically in the law enforcement division is pretty vast.
Thank you.
But as well as with green initiatives, and is there something that you're looking for sustainability as well? Not necessarily to be LEED certified, because that's so expensive, but incorporating that into this building.
I think at least from my standpoint, I would be looking through the design process, similar to what we did with the fire department. Yeah, LED lighting, things of that nature. Now, the one thing we didn't do with the fire department was, the solar panels on the roof and things of that nature. Obviously, something that we could absolutely take into consideration as we're going through the design phase of this, but definitely using those LEED principles. Without paying all the money to make it LEED certified, but looking for those energy efficiency designs, natural lighting where we can bring that in, things of that nature. Automatic light switches, they're motion censored and things of that nature. Most certainly, yeah.
And every project we'll do, we'll run through we have a gentleman that does energy analytics for us. And so we have a software program that will model the building early in the schematic process and look at opportunities that we can lower your utility costs if we were able to, add a shading device or not. We will look for, how your building will perform year round. And so we do have hot summers and relatively cold winters for a short period of time. We used to, at least. And so we want to make sure that the building performs optimally and can. One of the things you mentioned about PV arrays, they have dropped substantially in the last 8 years, probably half the price that they were. Unless you have a really large roof area, we're not seeing that having a cost benefit right now in terms. And normally, when I say cost benefit, we look at like a business decision, like does it have a 10-year or less break-even horizon on the investment? Because some of these strategies do cost some money initially. So what we normally recommend is that you target either no cost or low cost that has a 10-year break-even horizon, and then it will start paying for itself. That just makes sense. And so we'll go through that with you during the design process.
Okay.
Great question.
And it appears that you're a design build, not a design build. Is that okay. And, sorry.
Yeah, this process would definitely be different than what we did with the fire station, where that
Okay.
was a true design build. This would be, design. They would take us through the bid process, and then the way I would see it, if council elects to move forward, and take it all the way to the finish line, these guys would help us through obviously through the bid process, and then through the construction management process side of it. We would bid it out once we have the bids in, and your lowest qualified responsive bidder. That's when we would look to, all right, now it's time to vote and approve the financing options. So that way, as Dan said, he feels pretty comfortable with the 3.5 basically number, given that factor that he's put into it. Yeah, as the bids come in, yeah, they may be lower, it may be higher. But, you know, we don't want to set up the finance and get that approved and then put it out for bid and then, oh crap, we need another $500,000 or something like that. So yeah, this would definitely be a little bit different than the way we just did the fire station. Yes, ma'am.
What we've done a lot lately and had a lot of success with is a general contractor pre-qualification process. You know, where we wouldn't just open it up for bids and you got guys that you may not be familiar with bidding on it that are low end, responsible and bonded, but you have no idea of how they'll perform. So a lot of times what we'll do is, and if you want us to, is help pre-qualify those firms. We'll advertise the project and describe the project, have those contractors then submit their qualification package, which includes similar projects of complexity, size, track record, you know, 3 to 5 letters of reference from recent projects, and call those folks, check on those references to make sure they're reputable companies. And then that group, say you shortlist from, you know, you get 10, 15 respondents, and you get you hone those down to 5 or so, 5 to 7, and you allow that group to then formally bid the project. And that way, you've got a competitive bid process, and you know you're getting qualified, reputable contractors to bid your project. And so we've had a lot of success with that, and we get a good low, sharp price, sharp pencil price. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you. We really have enjoyed working with everybody and the chief, and you know, now you have the tough work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Here's the money guy. Well, how are you?
Only if he has the money.
Yeah, well,
Yep.
free.
They've got copies.
How's everybody doing?
We're well, how are you?
Good. So I've got some information, it's about 15 slides or so. It's going to talk through a number of available financing options for municipalities in South Carolina. I'm going to talk a little bit about advantages, disadvantages of each of those, talk a little bit about why there's probably one that fits you all best, and then once we go from there, we'll talk a little bit about what it's going to cost in terms of potential tax increases, and if no tax increase, what other dollars we'd have to find to offset that tax increase. So what can we do? What do we think works best for you? What's it going to cost you every year out of your budget? So I'm going to start on page 2 of the materials, and I'll do my best to keep going through this. So this is the outstanding tax-supported debt of the city. The chart on the bottom left-hand side of your page shows 3 different color groups. There is a blue group, the Series 2012 bond. That's a GO bond that was issued to fund your city hall. The gray in the middle of your page, that's the 2013 bond. That was the refinancing. It's a number of different purposes. Most of that is the golf facilities. And then the orange is the 2016 bond we did here a year ago to fund your fire station. And what I'll really draw your attention to is after 2030, which is the second to last year in that chart, you'll see how much your payments drop down. That's what we look for when we're trying to find capacity for new payments to come online. If we can get creative with how we repay our debt, hopefully we can offset or eliminate any potential tax increases. Unlike your mortgage, which most folks have a fixed payment every single month, you don't have to do that. We can have larger payments later, we can have larger payments earlier, however you'd like to do it to make it all work. So we're going to get a little creative in the materials that I've presented to you this evening, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's what we're working with. The next page, page 3, it's important to keep this in mind, is your 8% debt capacity. As we know in South Carolina, there are 2 different ways you can issue general obligation bonds. You can hold a referendum. We can go through that process, pay the costs. If we have a successful vote, you can borrow any amount that you would like, and you can raise taxes to do it. If it's the people's will, you have the authority to go and do that. If you do not want to have a referendum, what you can do is borrow up to 8% of your assessed value, and you don't have to have a referendum to do it. You can go and do it. It's a few readings, and we take care of it in 90 days, something like that. You have used your 8% debt capacity, like many folks, to fund important projects. If you look at the table, I'm going to work you left to right on it. The assessed value of the city is approximately $51 million. That gives you, at 8%, $4.1 million of debt capacity. But you've used about 2.8 of it. That leaves you what's left. It's about $1.3 million. We don't generally like folks to use all of that up. That's like cash in that you can quickly access money should you need it. If there's some sort of short-term crunch, if we need to build a building in a hurry, some sort of emergency service, that's really good flexibility for you to keep. And so we would love to see you maintain that. So keep that number in mind, $1.3 million. I know you just heard your construction estimate of 3.5, so we know that's not going to work.
Yeah, so far not good.
I'm going to hit on page 4 quickly. I'm sorry, folks. I know I've done a poor job here. That was the assessed value. This is just setting up the next few slides. There are a lot of different structures available. We got to find the right one for you all. What is our security? How are we repaying it? What term do we want to pay this back? A lot of equipment we do over 5 or 7 years. We've got a real asset here, and so maybe finance it over a longer period of time, match the useful life. So a lot of it goes into the soup, and on the next couple of pages, we're going to tick through each of these. And so if you come with me, page 5, we talk about GO bonds and whether or not they're voter approved or 8%. Like we said, this is the lowest interest cost. You can't get cheaper money than a GO bond if you're a municipality in South Carolina. But your 8% debt is limited. We know we don't have enough of it to fund this project, and the voter approval process can become burdensome. It's an option that you have available, and we can talk more about it. The next page, page 6, the federal government has loan programs that are available to you. The problem is that if it's not a revenue bond, so we don't have a specific revenue source to repay it, it's the same thing as 8% debt. So you can't do it and fund your entire project in this instance because we're going to repay debt with taxes. Operating millage likely is what we're looking at. If this were a water and sewer issue, that's a different story. We can reconsider this. Hospitality and accommodation fees, so any sales taxes, these can also be used to repay debt, but they are tied to the specific source. And so generally it has to be tourism related. Police stations, fire stations, those aren't generally options that you would, or projects you would fund with hospitality or accommodations. You also have a problem that your hospitality and accommodations is being used for other items in your budget. You don't have free cash flow to make new debt payments. And so this one doesn't really work for us. And so the last page, page 7, shows the option that we think will work well for you. It's called an installment purchase revenue bond. In South Carolina, this provides a few different advantages to you. You don't have to have a referendum to do it, and it's not limited to the 8% capacity of your assessed value, but it's a little more expensive. It's more expensive than GO bonds. If you wanted to know how much more, 25 basis points, so 1/4%. My GO bond is 3%. This is probably 3.25. And if you are planning to use debt service millage to repay this bond, you have to issue a general obligation bond every single year to do it. And so it's a little tricky, but to use debt service millage to repay debt, you actually have to have a GO bond outstanding. That's the only way you can levy. So if you can imagine, you'd borrow with a bank a GO bond, and then you would use those proceeds to make your installment purchase revenue bond payment. The installment purchase revenue bond payment is just like the bank deals you've done before. You would get a loan from a bank and you would repay it, but there's an extra wrinkle in there. Now, my understanding is that you're not planning on levying debt service millage, so the GO bond issue maybe is not applicable to you. And so when we compare this option to others, we'll want to compare interest cost to the other options, and then really what's it going to take to get you to closing. In terms of timing, it's pretty easy. We do a lot of them. If you looked in the table down at the bottom, these are all instances where we work as financial advisor, where we've done installment purchase revenue bonds. The city of Florence, Greenville, Greer, North Augusta, Florence County, Kershaw County, Orangeburg County, Charleston just did an installment purchase revenue bond, and so they're very common. They're known to banks, and you shouldn't have an issue marketing it to a bank. I'm going to pause there. The next couple of pages take us into the individual financing scenarios. Any questions about the options available to you, what we've talked about so far?
printing press that we can print our own money?
We're working on it.
Thank you.
Page 9 is going to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about in the next few pages. We ran 3 scenarios, and they're really all the same with just a different term and different rate included in there. So scenario number 1 assumes that in May of 18, you borrow $3.6 million. $100,000 of that is used to pay bank fees and advisor fees and lawyers, all those different types of items, and that's a conservative number. It'll cost you less than that. And then we assume that you pay 3% on that loan for 10 years. That's one of the highlighted items. That's really important. As we all know, if you pay off debt faster, your payments are higher. You save interest, so it's less expensive overall, but we've got to be able to make sure that we can afford those payments. So 10 years, scenario 2 is 15, lower payments, more interest. Scenario 3, 20 years, lower payments, more interest again. Let's jump to page 10, and feel free to speed me up or slow me down as we go along. Let's just look at the chart in the bottom left. The teal represents all of your existing tax-supported payments. And so you can see it peaks up a little bit in 20, and then it drops down, and then there's our cliff out in 2030, 2031. The orange bars represent the new payments for this project. You'll see that 10 years is not enough time for us to get some of these payments over our cliff. So what does that mean? All of your existing payments are there, and then this is just additive. We can't get really creative at all to get you lower overall payments, which means you're going to have to find a revenue source to fund all of this. Your existing millage, your operating millage that's being used to make debt service payments, it's not going to do you a lot of good. Yes, growth will help you, but you're really going to have to find some money in your budget or find it elsewhere to make this scenario work. If you look in the table on the right-hand side, look at the third column from the left, principal. There's our $3.6 million, and something I want to keep our eye on. It's $643,000 of interest. That's over the entire 10-year term. So the total payments are $4.2 million. And then you'll see this column, annual GO debt service. That's if we had to issue the annual GO bond. I don't think you're going to have to do that, just from my conversations with Charlie and Bob. So maybe let's keep our thumb on that, know it's there, but I don't think you're going to incur that cost.
That's the 192.
That's the $192,000, that's right. That only happens if you have to issue a GO bond. It sounds like you're gonna have money to make these payments, or we will be able to find money potentially to make these payments without that 8% bond issue. Okay, so what does that mean? Page 11. I apologize, I'm doing a terrible job of keeping us going here, and these are not, no, I'll pick it up. I'll pick up the slack. I'm going to take a little bit of time with this table the first time through, and I'll speed up the next 2 times through. There's a lot of numbers on this page. So I'm going to start in column 2 and work my way to the right. $57,000 for every mill that you levy on your operating budget. That's the amount of money that you receive, okay, $57,000. We're going to assume you collect about 99% of that, so let's just discount it slightly. Let's say that when the money actually gets into the account, we collect $56,925. In 2018, in your 2018 budget, you had to pay $751,000 of general obligation bond debt service. So quick and easy math, $56,000 is every mill I get in. I need $750. 13.19 mills of your operating budget, which I believe is 89 mills, is used to make these payments. Okay, so what we would love to do is say, all right, well, if we can get your new payments around your old ones and we don't have to change the 13.19, we've got a revenue source, right? We can make it happen, and you don't have to cut or find new revenue. So that's what we're going to try and do. Your growth rate, which is actually shown in column 3, and this is the same growth rate we used in 2016, and I know in your 17, the current value of a mill, actually for your 2018 budget, you've outdone the growth that we've been projecting. So we assume that over the next 8 years or so, your value of a mill, your property tax base, grows at about 4.8%. And that's a number that the city has put together and has been used before. And then we assume it's 1% every year thereafter. That growth, without increasing millage, column 6, you see it stays the same in every year, gives you the revenue stream in column 7. So you see how $750,000 is what we needed in the 2018 budget, but that number, if we keep growing and keep allocating that revenue for payments, is going to grow over time. And out in 2031, for example, that 13.2 mills will be worth about $1.1 million in revenue. So let's compare that to our existing debt service, which is in column 8, and you'll see the payments, they spike up a little bit in 2020, and then they drop off over time, and they go away in 2031, 2032. So hold your finger on that gray line right above 2032. Using this projection, you'd have $1.1 million of revenue and only $200,000 of debt service payments. That's what we call debt service capacity. You can absorb new payments without having to raise property taxes in that instance. And so that's what we're going to try and target. Column 9, that's the 8%, that's your total debt service payments on your new bond. So that's got to be added to column 8. Column 10 is the annual GO. We don't think that happens, but let's include it for now just to be conservative. That gets me my total debt service in column 11. So here's my problem spot. In 2019, that's your next budget, we need $1.2 million, and we are projected to only have $787,000 available to us. So we've got a gap. That gap is $448,000. That's shown in column 12. And just doing the simple math, if your value of a mill is $59,000, that's 7.5 mills that you would have to raise taxes to generate that revenue source to make that payment. You could either raise taxes or you could cut from other places and you could find that money. But we look at that and say, that's a pretty big number.
Yeah.
But we are only showing you at this point the 10-year term. We know we can get some relief by going a little bit longer, which is what we typically do. And in 2016, we did a 15-year term. So that's the way the table works, left to right. Any questions about how we've laid it out? All right, I'm going to move.
Quite organized.
I'm going to move a little quicker. Let's just look at the chart on the bottom of page 12 real quick. So you see how my orange bars for the first 10 years or so are a little smaller on this chart, and then they get much larger in the back end. So what we're doing is we're repaying more of our debt later in the process. In the last 3 years, we increase our payments significantly so that overall, when you add it all together, your payments are level. It's going to lower your payments by about $200,000 or so in these early years, but you'll pay more in interest cost. So let's cheat ahead to the middle of the table on the right-hand side. Total interest is $1.48 million versus $643,000 on the previous page. So a significant increase, $800,000 or so in terms of an increase for you. But what does it do in the way of my millage increase? Potential millage increase. I'll continue to caveat that. Let's just cheat column 13. Everything else on this page is identical to what we showed you before. Column 13, that 7.5 mils of revenue that we were looking for is now down to 3. $448,000, which was our bad spot out in 2020 in column 12, is only $187,000. So if we can find revenue of $187,000 in next year's budget to make these payments, we don't have to have the tax increase that's shown in column 13. All it's telling you is that if you are unable to find other revenues and you would raise property taxes, that's what it would take given these estimates. But $187,000 to us seemed like a much more manageable, while it's not nothing, it's more manageable than $450,000 of an increase. All right, and I'm going to quickly hit the last option. The last option is a 20-year term, longer term, lower payments, slightly more interest. This is not an option that we're going to recommend to you. What you'll find is that we can only lower our payments so much in the early years. It doesn't do anything for you in the way of lower revenue required, and it increases your overall interest cost. And so we don't think this is a good option. If you jump ahead actually to page 15 real quick, you'll see that in column 13, you actually need more money in 2020 because the interest rate is higher. So what that's saying is with the 15-year option, we're already just paying interest in 2020, your bad year. There's no principal. So we can't get rid of principal to lower your payments. Now it's just interest. You go longer, you've got a bigger interest rate. You're going to have more interest to be paid. So that's not a good option. So the last page, page 16, summarizes all this information. Let's go one more time. Page 16 summarizes all this information. I'll focus on column 1 and 2, and I'll cheat all the way ahead down to the bottom. Actually, let's just go straight to the very bottom. The 10-year option means in your worst year, you need to find $448,000 to make those payments. It gets better from there, but that's your worst year. If you go to 15 years and we defer a little bit of principal around your current payments, we can get that number down to $187,000. But that's still money that you don't have or you're not allocating in your current budget that we need to find to make these payments. The millage increase, if you had a millage increase, would go from 7.5 to 3. And then column 3 all the way on the right, again, you need a little bit more money because the interest rate's slightly higher, so probably not a good option for you. There's a lot of numbers. I've talked through it pretty quickly. I'll pause. Any questions about the information we're presenting, what it says, what we think about it?
Tyler, if I can, and I know you and I have talked about this, but just so council is aware, yeah, obviously not asking them to make decisions this evening. They've received a lot of info, but if council were to choose to move forward with the design phase and getting construction documents done and things like that, at the point that once they actually, let's say they decide to do the IPRB at 15 years, we can reimburse ourselves, correct, on those soft costs, on the engineering and things like that, that we may incur between, let's say January, February, whatever, and the time that the actual IPRB would be issued. Is that correct?
That's right, soft costs. Construction costs, you would have to adopt a reimbursement resolution, but for engineering design, yes, you can pay yourself back from proceeds of a tax-exempt bond issue.
But that's basically incurring more debt, so. Right? You're
Well,
borrowing more money.
Well, it's costs that would be identified. If you recall back to Dan's presentation and his budget schedule, he had the design costs and things like that in there.
Yep.
So you're still borrowing it, but what you would end up doing is before you actually issue your actual debt, you would pay that through cash, operating cash out of the budget, but then you could put that cash back once you issue once you do actually formally issue the debt. So if council were to elect to spend from reserves, $100,000 or whatever the case may be to go through the design element, at the time that you actually take on the debt and the financing, you would be able to legally put that money back.
Got it.
So
Still money, still spend, it's still all,
What is our timeline? That was not discussed, and.
It really
let's
is gonna-
say if we decided, let's move forward, even allocating funds for engineering and.
best
We later determine how we're gonna finance it.
absolute best case scenario, if council were to decide at your December council meeting, yes, this is the funding we want to do, let's do it. Probably March would be the earliest we would be able to have the bond, the financing in place, and then you would have 2 reads on that. If we were to turn Mosley Architects loose tomorrow on the design phase, you're middle of November at this point. You probably don't get those construction documents back until best case scenario into January. This isn't something that I would recommend that you do a 30-day bid process. If you're into that 60, 90-day type bid, you would, best case scenario, you're probably starting construction by June of 18, best case scenario, but probably you're in July, August type frame. And then you're probably, we budgeted on the fire department thinking 12 months. Obviously, winter worked out and things went well. But you would be looking at actually operating out of that facility June of 19, July of 19, and that's pushing it. That would be an aggressive schedule. It's definitely not something that could be done overnight. And again, wasn't looking for any real decisions tonight, more so than just trying to give information, and if there's questions we can answer tonight, we want to do that. This could be, if there's additional questions as you review the material, don't hesitate to send them to me. We'll get you the answers. It could be a discussion item on the December agenda to discuss further. It really just taking direction from council. But if it were open the gates and let's go as fast as we can. The earliest you'd have a financing package in front of you to even do a first read on a IPRB would be March, realistically.
Yep, and we wouldn't ask that of you until we knew what those construction costs ultimately were gonna be.
Right.
Yep.
Is there a way to take out the fixtures, furnishings, and equipment out of this 20-year or 15 years so that we're not
Oh, yeah,
financing furniture?
Same as what we did with the fire department. I mean, we could, as we go through the design phase, just like we did with our architects and construction folks with the fire department, here's what the actual budget is, before we go to these guys to do a bank placed, type deal. What areas do we think it makes sense, or does council think it makes sense to pay cash for versus, financing? We did a number of items, the testing, the engineering, furniture, things like that, we paid cash for out of the fire department. Your 20 and 30-year items, were paid through the bond. So absolutely, you could do that.
Help me out a second. Scenario 2, which is the 15 years. I'm short $187,000. So if I can come up with $187,000, you can get me financing for this.
I can get you financing for it if it's an IPRB, because the assumption is going to be that you will get that money. So it's not a can I get it, it's how do I pay for it. And I think the answer to your question is yes. If you can come up with $187,000, I can give you a scenario that does not show a tax increase.
How many homes do we have in the city right now?
Yeah, 3842, 3850, somewhere in that ballpark. Yes, sir.
Change my math then. Okay, so 3842 you said? I'm gonna go with 3,800 for giggles. So $188,000 divided by 3,800 homes is $40.50. $49.50, excuse me, divided by 12. $4.13
A month.
a month. The city currently pays $710,000 a year for trash pickup, which is $15 a house. So if we decided to pay the majority of that, $11, and ask the resident to pay $4 a month, that's $188,000.
Yes, sir.
And we have the ability to do that through the water bill, correct?
Correct.
There's your $188,000. And there's no tax increase.
We also have some commercial properties that are coming online. How far out did we look for projections of what those are gonna be?
Well,
bringing
if
in?
you see if you'll recall in Tyler's spreadsheet, he had that 4.8 increase each year out to 2025, and that's an increase on the value of a mill. That was factoring in based on what we are anticipating as a build-out, so to speak. Now, granted, with those commercial, Stonecrest, Windhaven, Game On, and as Tyler alluded to, we've already surpassed the 4.8 from last year to this year. You would think you're probably going to be in that probably what, 6.5% growth rate versus that 4.8. So, with those commercial entities coming on, there's a couple of that are one now in the queue in Stonecrest that we should be permitting through the winter, breaking ground as they come out of the winter. Not a huge project, but you definitely have some commercial growth that is in the very near pipeline. Yes, ma'am.
What are we doing to let the public know about all this? Is all this stuff online on our page?
The slideshows right now are not online. Want to discuss that with you guys. Obviously, we're live tonight. It will be replayed and hung online. Tim has been showing these slides that I know are hard to see here in the room, has been showing those on TV so people will be able to see them. We can absolutely put these presentations online for people to look at. I need to confer with both of our consultants to make certain that they don't have a problem with that being hung out there. But yeah, we definitely want to get that information out to the public. And again, we're not looking to. It's physically impossible to rush through this thing. I mean, we can't get the exact pricing nailed down. Yeah, the obvious next step, in my opinion, for council at some point would be to approve the next step, which would be to go to the design phase. Yeah, that way we can start. I mean, you could go to design and build, relatively speaking, without spending a lot of money, to where you know what your exact costs are, exactly what it's going to look like. And just because you go out to bid doesn't mean you have to issue notice to proceed.
I'm thinking more of what's an active role that we can take to make sure the public knows about this before, besides just this. I mean,
Right.
something that they can go, we're gonna tell them somehow, is whether it be on the bulletin board or whatever our city pages are, something to let them know what's going on. And I do like the idea George said about charging the houses a certain rate, but we gotta also include the commercial people too. We don't want just the houses, just the residents to pay for this. I think we just,
Well, most of our commercial have their own.
yes.
So they have our own trash pickup.
So Walmart pays their own trash bills, so do Walmart.
So how do we bring in a commercial aspect on this for them to pay their fair share of police department?
Only way would be the mill increase.
Or,
The only way being-
or
Can't
you,
just
Do a
do
mill
it.
increase on commercial?
no,
Yeah,
No.
has to be across the
you
board.
could, well, you could look at your business license fees.
Oh, good lord.
I'm just,
I'll do money, I can't
I
do
didn't say that's what you
business.
needed to do. I'm just saying, if you want,
Good
if you consider charging for trash for residential, and you wanted the commercial entities to also contribute towards that, business license, or, we'd go through the process of developing impact fees, which would hit your, any of your new growth,
New, yeah.
residential,
So
commercial.
we couldn't capture any of the people, all the commercial that are here now.
It would take you a minimum of 12 months to even be in line to really do your impact fees.
And the other thing that I think we should look at, not for commercial, but, you know, we always, we see these financials, and of course, we're only dealing with the debt that we have now and the new debt that we'd incur for the police station. And I don't know that anybody at the table doubts that we need a new police station, believe me. But I think that it would serve the city well if, I guess this will be up to the new council, but you ought to be spitballing a little bit about what other major types of spend we can anticipate over the next X years that are going to be big ticket items that we also need to find money for along the way. So it's always nice, you know, to say, oh, heck, we could do this, just like in our personal lives. Oh, yeah, we can do this. We can get that house for $500,000. We could buy the car out of the showroom. And then, oh, crap, I didn't know that I had asbestos in my house, or I needed a big plumbing repair, or, you know, the utility pipes. And so, again, while I don't think anybody doesn't think this is necessary, Chief, you know, like I said, you had me as soon as I parked the car, because I couldn't get out of it. The spaces were so small. But, you know, that when we make these decisions as a council, you really need to look just beyond this project. And I don't see that certainly has happened yet, at least not to my recollection, so.
Through our capital improvements program that council approved last year, realistically, your two big ticket items that are non-utility related are the police station and Catalpa Park. As far as your big capital items, those are your big, kind of your next big projects for the foreseeable future. You know, City Hall is, we've been in it for 6 years now. We're still in really good condition there. We've got the council chambers, not looking to do anything there. Don't see a need to do anything there. Obviously, golf course has some capital things, but that's paid for out of golf. Your utility
maybe.
department's got stuff. Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, all of a
that's
sudden,
my
everybody could
point.
decide to, yeah.
And trust me, I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm simply saying that, yes, we approved a capital improvements plan. Things change. And I just think that we need to appreciate the fact that the infrastructure is aging. It always will, just like anything. And that as we look to take on these big projects where we're having funding for multiple years, 15 years or longer, it would behoove the council to sit down and review that list again and think about if there's anything else that should be added, and just sort of project out a little bit and make sure that when you make this decision that you're comfortable with it as you can possibly be. knowing that things happen that are unpredictable as well. That's all I'm saying.
I just, previous councils have have borrowed against projections. This facility itself. We borrowed money against the projections that Lake Shore would bring money into the city, and they did. And we're still paying the service on that debt. By chance, do you have that budget somewhere that I had asked you guys to do? Where? Okay. Because when we went through the budget process, if we took all the bells and whistles out and just paid our bills, we took everything out, no flowers, no flags, just nothing. All the things that you can touch and feel in the city that make the city so much better. And I think Ryan asked me if I was running for mayor at the time. I'd already said no.
That's a good thing you weren't.
Right. If you look at that budget, how much money did we have?
It was about $2.73 million.
$3 million that we could have put in the bank. So we need to think about that stuff when we're going through these processes. And I understand, Dottie, what you're saying about the fact that we need to look at the things that go bump in the night and the reason why we shouldn't, just jump, both feet in. But this is an issue that we've had for 15 years?
Well, if you go back to we had been 6, 7, 8 years outgrown our old station where there at the entrance of Amberwoods. When we left it, we were already 5, 6 years past that. We've been in this one since '05. It worked, suited the need for probably the first 3, 4 years. It caught us up, for that first 3, 4 years, and then after that, but even then, all the issues that are presenting today were issues when that came online. The building hasn't moved more. No. The hallways are still the same. We've been putting lipstick on a pig for a while now.
Again, I'm not saying don't do it.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that you. I didn't see
Get a
that.
good assessment of
Right. I
everything
didn't say that
else
you
that
didn't-
you can
that you're gonna do
predict,
it.
and then have a good financial strategy for handling this and handling other things. That's all I'm saying.
I see 5, maybe 6 retired officers at some point or another in law enforcement, whether it's
Something else, if we can, before you go there, just something Steve reminded me of, something I think is something that we've got to, it's crucial too, so.
Just something that I feel like it's important to the citizens to know as well. In September 2018, we won't be allowed to use the Fort Mill Jail, and we'll be moving to the Moss Justice. With that, that's really there's gonna be a need, unless we have a newer building, that we'll have to go to 5 officers per shift just for the 3 hours that it cost us for transport and booking going back and forth. That's roughly $300,000 for 1 officer per shift at 4 officers plus vehicles. So without that, and with this new facility, we have a holding area where we can do bond hearings and have to transfer less, so that we're at least going at half of what we would be currently. So that's just something that I felt like the citizens should really understand, because there's a huge cost to that if we don't move forward with the building.
which is the same thing Rock Hill is doing too. They're going away from their jail system too, correct?
Fort Mill and Rock Hill are talking about going away from their jail system.
All right. Again, I see 5 retired law enforcement officers. Do you guys have any comments that you want to present to us and tell us about what you think? Do we have a microphone for that?
You just sit right here. Hi,
Marty, how are you?
Doing good. First of all, I want to thank everybody for trying to wrap their head around this thing.
You know what? Hey,
Let's
Charlie,
sit
Charlie,
here.
can Marty just, all right, there you go.
Here?
Marty, if you would just state your name and address,
Sure.
I'd appreciate it. Thank
Marty
you.
Cameron, 11149 Scholars Run. Again, thanks.
The mic's got to go closer to your,
Let him sit down, it's easier.
he doesn't want to.
Okay.
We
Oh,
offered him
Marty,
that.
sit down, for Pete's sake. We won't put you on
We are?
council. Sit down.
Here, just sit down.
Election's over.
I'm gonna try to cut this shorter. I didn't know this meeting was going so long.
Give a politician a microphone, they'll just keep talking.
Not me. I'm addressing you this evening on behalf of the Tega retired law enforcement officers. Collectively, we have about 200 years of service amongst us and experience, working in various state, city, and local, as well as federal agencies across the country. It's with the same knowledge and experience that we were motivated to advocate on behalf of the Tega Police Department and for the construction of a new police facility. A letter authored by our members, which has been provided to you, outlines in detail our observations and subsequent opinions in regard to the inherent problems plaguing the current police facility. In lieu of reading the letter in its entirety, I'll just summarize, noting the most pertinent deficiencies which you touched upon today, this evening. The lack of space. The building back in the 70s and 80s was not originally meant to be a police station. The other ones were the health concerns and the multiple safety issues within the building itself, which I went into detail, well outlined in the report. In spite of these conditions, the officers and civilian employees have continued to perform the duties at their highest levels. The most recent response to a domestic violence and possible active shooter complaint, along with the York County Sheriff's Department, was resolved without further incident. These same men and women serve our community in many other ways, like the lake patrols, missing person investigation, managing the Camp Cadet program, responding automobile accidents, burglary calls, and coffee with a cop. And they graciously, every holiday season, act as Christmas light tour guides for us. Their dedication and service to the community is tireless and for the most part goes unnoticed. That's the nature of the job and the police officer. The Tega retired law enforcement officers are respectfully requesting consideration by this body to develop a plan to construct a new and fully functional police headquarters in the near future to help sustain its ability to function as this city and its population grows. I want to thank you for letting me speak.
Marty, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Thanks. Tom Tremblay, 1746 Colville Lane, TK. Marty asked me to join him in a couple statements. A lot of the stuff you guys have already covered, so I'm not even going to touch on it because I think you're aware of the liability right now in the building that exists. We were kind of surprised to see, as you probably were, how extensive the facilities are, how far they've gone. Through the lens that we look at it from former law enforcement, it doesn't even meet basic law enforcement needs, in our opinion. Two things I just want to touch on, however, is that is the liability part. Right now, there exists a substantial liability with its current condition. And when you proceed with your deliberations, hope that you'll consider that and weigh that in the immediacy and the complexity of what you're looking at. I might also suggest that you not overlook some interim measures, which could be a temporary facility to augment what's existing there while you fund and build the existing structure. There are also, and I'm sure Mosley has looked at this, but there are also established safety planning guidelines that exist currently. International Association of the Chiefs of Police is one of them that has an extensive background in building and creating these facilities that should be used to augment these. So we can't speak enough to this, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else?
Yes. Please.
Sure.
My name is Vincent DeRoche. I live at 7124 Top Sales Circle. I don't have any prepared statement, but I would say, based on the observations of tonight's discussion, that any proposal should be made public. It should be by the public, with the public. And my concern is that while you came up with a creative funding mechanism, you seem to imply that it was not an increase in tax.
It's an indirect increase in tax. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and that's why I would insist that the public be fully involved, because it's an increase in the dollars out of my pocket, which I've been living here for almost 6 years, about 6 years, and my real tax rate has gone up significantly.
Not from the city.
That is irrelevant to me, because my wallet, it doesn't look at it that way. It's the overall payments that I make for utilities and everything else. And so, to Dottie's point earlier, I think a true assessment over time needs to be made, and not just exclusively with this. I'm not qualified to assess whether or not, the current facility is good or not good or whatever, but I think that it certainly should be something that is assessed with alternatives and options, not simply one particular thing and various financial mechanisms to achieve only that goal. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Where do we go from here?
I can have this, if it's all right with council, I can put this on a December agenda for further discussion, direction. Your November agenda packets and everything be coming out tomorrow Wednesday. So a little too late to really do anything November, other than just discuss it further if you want. December, I can bring back pricing on design, engineering cost if council wants to see those numbers and discuss those numbers. Obviously, we can work, we'll work to, here in the next day or so, be able to get this information up on our website for the public to be able to see what we're discussing and what we're looking at. Really just kind of up to council as to what y'all would like to see next and what time frame you want to see it in.
I mean, I know in the new year I won't be on council, but I think that could be helpful for us, looking at these numbers, is for us removing the items that we would not plan on financing. That, I mean, if we're removing this, that's $500,000. So I think maybe if we can see those numbers readjusted with what we really think we're gonna be financing, to see what your real true costs are, I think that'll be very helpful.
It's going to be hard to do, other than just, right now I'm looking at these numbers as budgetary numbers. It's going to be hard to look at it from a standpoint until you get through design. I can talk with Mosley Architect. From a furnitures and fixtures standpoint, to see, we haven't asked them to do a true inventory and cost per desk per chair type thing. They have now completed the scope of work that they were hired to do originally. We can absolutely work with them to do that. But I think, and I could be wrong, that we're going to find they're going to have a hard time drilling down those numbers until they actually get into the design side of things. Now, on the furnitures and fixtures, they may be able to drill that $500,000 down to, maybe it's only $300,000, maybe it's only $200,000 or something of that nature. I really don't know, but I think until you have the true full cost, it's going to be hard to determine, okay, how much are we financing? And I don't think you're going to have that exact cost until you're into a bid. It's going to cost you some money to engineer it, to design it. But at that point, you can put it out for bid and decide you're not taking another step. Hey, wow, the bids came in at $4.5 million instead of $3.5 million, or whatever the case may be. Which is really similar to what we did with the fire station. It was, doing the design build, you kind of got all the information all at the exact same time. You really did. Doing the police station that way is gonna be a lot harder. Yeah, but, well, I can definitely work with with your consultants and bring that info back if that's what you want.
I think it would be wise, I mean, he said he was on the upper end here, and then he put a 10% contingency in, hoping it would be 5%. So, I mean, that's a significant amount of money, and he's already estimating the high, is the way I thought, explained it to us.
Yes.
So, if we can, the site and construction testing, those seem pretty standard. And I understand, he said that he did not count deaths and such, but, yeah, I think that's $435,000 and $969, I mean, that's a lot of money. For us to get a more realistic picture, if he really felt the up above portion was correct. On the high end, actually, he said.
We said 30,000, we need more of a 10,000.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Dottie?
no, I got nothing else.
Brian? David?
Hurts my head, but not yet.
So, anybody want to give direction to Charlie for, we doing this in November, we doing this in December?
Well, it
I
wouldn't be-
think December's plenty.
December's-
Just 'cause
December's-
for me personally, with ingesting the numbers and talking
Yep.
to people,
It gives
I'm
them-
far from being a professional when it comes to these things, so I'd rather sit down, discuss more in detail with you, Charlie, with everybody involved. Obviously, we need a new police station.
Right.
We all know that,
That part's gonna happen, we know
but
that.
yeah, I'd rather ingest the information, ask the questions, talk to people, have the most opportunity to make a intelligent, educated decision.
So there's your direction. Everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion, second. You
Motion
made the
and
motion.
Second.
You motioned.
We're adjourned.
Second.